Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. So after a massive amount of incompetence, both by the FBI and Department of Justice, a suspect in the assassination of conservative commentator turned martyr Charlie Kirk was identified as 22-year-old Tyler Robinson. Initially, I was going to hold off on discussing him too much because there was really too much that was not really known. There was far too much rumor and conjecture and not enough actual hard facts. And while I'm by no means an actual journalist, I felt that if I was going to discuss him, I should hold off until there were actual facts to discuss. But as most of the media outlets have not waited, and the so-called actual journalists have had no issue publishing just complete conjecture and at times feels like entirely invented fiction, I figured why hold off? At worst, I could come back and make an episode about him that discuss actual established facts instead of just the narratives invented by these people designed to gain clicks and outrage. In a move that should surprise absolutely no one, and certainly didn't surprise me, Robinson has been branded a radical leftist who espoused leftist ideologies, and that's what motivated him to kill the great Charles James Kirk. I mean, that makes complete sense. They'd invented this narrative that the assassin would be a radical leftist who just hated Charlie Kirk and conservatism as an ideology. So when they picked up this guy, of course, the first thing they do is to fit him into the narrative they'd already invented. They wanted him to be a radical leftist, so they've made him into one. The problem with this narrative, of course, is that it ignores the facts. His family are all registered Republican. His father is a former law enforcement officer and a minister. There are numerous publicly available images of a young Tyler Robinson holding assault rifles. There's even a picture of him from a few years ago wearing a Halloween costume where he rides on the shoulders of Donald Trump. Now, it's true, as some have said, just because you grew up in a highly conservative Mormon household surrounded by conservative values and guns doesn't automatically mean that you personally are in line with those things. Many have said, but he could have been rebelling against his upbringing and become radicalized to the left. But once again, there's no evidence to support that other than a growing desire to distance himself from those deeply conservative and right-wing roots, because of course it does not fit the narrative of the leftist assassin who killed the innocent Charlie Kirk for his conservative values. Then they point to his trans roommate and say, a conservative would never have a trans roommate, leftist. But then of course when you fact-check that claim, it turns out there is no trans roommate. It was a guy who rented a room to Tyler. The evidence of his transness, I suppose, is maybe feminine features and the fact that there was an image of him wearing an animal-themed onesie, something he'd often wear in his pastime as a gaming streamer. So we go from a picture of a guy wearing an animal hooded sweatshirt to this is Tyler Robinson's trans lover and he's a leftist terrorist. No facts, just an invented scenario to fit the pre-established narrative. Then they say, but he engraved trans and leftist propaganda on the bullet casings. He's a leftist. But once again, we see an example of the narrative leading the facts instead of the other way around. It wasn't leftist propaganda ideology he put on those bullets. They were references to a video game and memes. Not even leftist memes. Memes popular with the alt-right. They weren't signs of his leftist leanings. In actuality, they may have been a sign that he was the exact opposite and been more in line with a group called Groypers, a movement led by white supremacist and anti-Semite Nick Fuentes, leading to at least some speculation that Tyler may have assassinated Charlie Kirk not because he was right-wing, but because he wasn't right-wing enough. Charlie Kirk was actually one of that group's main targets. They viewed him as a, quote, fake conservative, viewing his conservative rhetoric to be not extremist enough. They were also known to use, quote, progressive symbolism as a way to confuse and obfuscate their true intentions and beliefs. So what we may have here is not an example of the evil leftist silencing the innocent and godly conservative voice, but the adherent to an extremist right-wing ideology murdering a fellow conservative for not being the extreme hardline right conservative that he should have been in their eyes. But of course, once again, that doesn't fit the pre-established narrative that this is an evil leftist, a pro-trans anti-fascist who who assassinated a great conservative man in front of his wife, children, and a bunch of college students. And it's amazing when you look at the discourse online just how many people buy into this notion that Tyler Robinson was a leftist who killed Charlie Kirk for his conservative beliefs, and not even just within conservative spaces, which in itself is a dangerous thing to see. It's people discounting anything that may contradict their beliefs and preconceived notions, and not only downplaying any contradictory evidence, but also anyone who might push back against that narrative as just being in denial and trying to defend him. Too many falling into the trap of the quote, often attributed to Mark Twain, about never letting the truth get in the way of a good story. And I suppose to a degree I understand. I think for many they're starting to feel a burnout where this has been the one main story that has been hammering them constantly for the last few days. And as a result, the temptation to just brand him as a radical leftist assassin and just let that be his explanation and they can just move on seems to just grow. But this desire to forgo facts and nuance for expediency is of course a very dangerous one. The truth and the facts matter, especially in a case like this, where it's all too easy to take rumor and conjecture and conflate that with the reality and never look deeper than a very surface level understanding and reading of the facts. Now, I also understand that talking about facts and truth at a time where so little is actually known is maybe a bit presumptuous, and I suppose it could be argued that simply by doing it myself, I am a bit of a hypocrite if I'm going to criticize others for jumping to conclusions from the very little we know for sure at the moment. It could turn out that he really isn't a follower of Nick Fuentes' Groyper movement, and he is more in line with the leftist assassin fantasy that they invented the moment the news broke that Charlie Kirk had been shot. But until that has become definitively disproven, I'm inclined to believe it. It's an unfortunate fact that the internet and rhetoric around politics on the internet has served to radicalize a lot of younger people. Extremists like Nick Fuentes and even Charlie Kirk to some degree have managed to use the internet's wide reach to shape impressionable young minds to their beliefs. And this all may serve as a cautionary tale about how internet extremism can cause white young men to fall into a hole of radical ideology while trying to find their own identity. And sometimes that can lead to violence and tragedy. But as usual, I'm really not sure the right lessons are going to be learned from this event. It's far too easy to turn the death of Charlie Kirk into an anti-left, anti-trans dog whistle, and what's worse is that so many have taken the bait. They want so badly for Tyler Robinson to be a leftist that even when the evidence doesn't seem to actually support that, they go with it anyway. We're at a time right now where the facts matter the most of all, and not going with your gut feeling in a completely invented narrative is absolutely paramount. I admit at this moment there's still a lot we don't know, and the whole Tyler Robinson story and his motivations for doing what he did is still very much a developing story. There's a lot that could change and a lot we don't yet know, so it feels presumptuous to really say it's case closed one way or another, whether he is a left-wing extremist assassin or a victim of right-wing extremist indoctrination. But my money is on this being a case of a young man fighting its identity in all the wrong places, who was convinced to form a terrible act for all the wrong reasons. I suppose his true identity and motivations are yet to be uncovered and definitively established. And we can only hope they are, and the accused assassin doesn't suffer an accident before he's able to reveal them, and he's no longer alive to refute any claims made against him. When I look at this whole situation, all I see are victims. The only ones who seem to be winning are those who want to use Tyler and Charlie Kirk's murder to further demonize those on the left and to maintain or even grow the rift between the two political parties, and those within the administration who relish this distraction from the growing Epstein situation and the possible forthcoming releasing of the Epstein files. It could very well be that Tyler Robinson was an unwitting pawn in a much greater and more far-reaching plan. I can only hope in the coming days and weeks we learn more hard facts, because the longer we're left with just conjecture and propaganda, the longer it has set in people's minds until they believe those are the facts and that is the reality when they are far from it. I, of course, am following this story closely and will return with updates as they become available. Well, guys, I guess that's it for this episode. So until next time, I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until the next episode where I cut you off another slice of news.